We found a tree whose rings spelled out today's date when we cut into it. At first, none of us spoke. The saw had bitten clean through, its teeth grinding to a halt as the trunk gave way with a slow, fibrous groan. The tree leaned, paused, as if reconsidering, and then collapsed into the undergrowth with a muffled crash that seemed to sink into the forest rather than echo through it. Silence followed. Not the ordinary quiet of deep woods, but something denser. As if the air had thickened. Evan was the first to crouch. "Hey," he said, not loudly, but the sound of his voice felt misplaced, like a foreign object dropped into still water. "You should look at this." I stepped closer, boots pressing into the damp loam. The scent of sap rose immediately, sharp, metallic, almost sweet. Too sweet. It clung to the back of my throat. The exposed cross-section of the trunk was smooth where the saw had passed. The rings were unusually pronounced, dark lines set against pale wood. But they weren't concentric in the way they should have been. They bent, subtly, but undeniably, curving inward, then outward, breaking pattern in ways that made my eyes struggle to follow them. "Count them," Evan said. "I don't need to count," I replied, though I didn't know why I said it. Because I already saw it. The rings grouped themselves unnaturally, clusters of 4, then 2 again. A break. Then 2 more. Each segment thicker, darker, as if emphasized. 4, 2, 2, Evan whispered. Then, 2. "Don't," I said. 24, 22, he finished anyway, his voice flattening as the realization landed. Today's date. We stood there, staring into the open body of the tree as if it might rearrange itself if we watched long enough. It didn't. Behind us, something shifted in the forest. Not a sound, exactly. More like the suggestion of movement, a rearranging of presence. "Trees don't do that," I said, too quickly. Evan let out a breath that might have been a laugh, but it had no humor in it. "No, they don't. We should have left it there. Packed up, turned back, written it off as coincidence or pareidolia or anything that belonged to the world we understood. Instead, Evan reached out and touched the cut surface. The moment his fingers made contact, the forest inhaled. That was the only way I can describe it. The air tightened, drawing inward. The faint breeze threading through the canopy stilled, and the distant insect noise cut off mid-stridulation. Even the leaves seemed to hold themselves rigid. Evan jerked his hand back. "What?" I asked. He stared at his fingertips. Sap clung to them, but it wasn't clear or amber. It was dark. Too dark. "Feels warm," he said. "Sap isn't supposed to feel warm." I crouched beside him, leaning in despite myself. The rings seemed deeper now, the grooves more pronounced. The date clearer. And then, impossibly, it shifted. Not visibly, not in any way I could point to, but something about the pattern felt corrected. Like it had adjusted itself into a more precise alignment. I blinked hard. "Did you see that?" I asked. "Yeah," Evan said immediately, which made it worse. "I think so." Neither of us elaborated. We both knew what we meant. Behind us, a branch snapped. We turned sharply. Nothing stood there. Just trees, tall, narrow trunks stretching upward into a canopy so dense it turned the afternoon light into a dim, green-filtered dusk. But the feeling remained, of being observed, not from a single point, but from everywhere at once. "Let's mark it," Evan said suddenly. "What?" "The tree. If we come back, we'll want to find it again." "I don't think we should come back," I said. He ignored me, already reaching into his pack. He pulled out a strip of red survey tape and tied it around a nearby branch. The color looked wrong. Against the forest. Too bright. Too artificial. As he cinched the knot, the branch dipped slightly under his touch. Then, slowly, it rose again. Higher than it had been before. We both noticed. Neither of us commented. We didn't leave immediately. That's the part one keep replaying. We lingered. We examined the cut surface again, tracing the rings with our eyes, counting them in different ways, trying to disprove what we'd seen. But no matter how we approached it, the pattern held. Today's date. Precise. Unmistakable. And as the minutes passed, the forest began to change. At first, it was subtle. The light dimmed further, though the sun hadn't set. Shadows thickened, stretching in directions that didn't match the position of the trees. The temperature dropped, not dramatically, but enough that I noticed the cool seep through my jacket. Then came the sound. A low, intermittent creaking. Not from a single tree, but from many. As if the forest itself were shifting its weight. Evan stood up, scanning the surroundings. We should go. Yeah, I said. We turned back the way we'd come. Or where we thought we'd come. The path wasn't there. Not entirely gone, but altered. The narrow trail we'd followed wound through the trees in a clear, linear direction. Now it bent, doubled back, split into two narrower tracks that both looked equally worn. That's not right, Evan said. No, I agreed. We chose one. As we walked, I became aware of a faint pattern beneath our feet. The ground felt uneven, not in the natural way of roots and stones, but in a more deliberate rhythm. 4 steps. Slight dip. 2 steps. Rise. 2 steps. Dip again. I stopped. Do you feel that? I asked. Evan took a few more steps, then slowed. Yeah. We looked down. The forest floor was a patchwork of soil, leaves, and roots, but the arrangement wasn't random. The roots emerged in clusters, forming subtle ridges and depressions. 4, 2, 2. The same pattern. Coincidence, Evan said, but his voice lacked conviction. We kept walking. The further we went, the more the pattern asserted itself. Not just underfoot, but in the spacing of the trees, the arrangement of fallen branches, the way the light filtered through gaps in the canopy. Everything aligned to that sequence. 4, 2, 2, 2. The date. Stop, I said suddenly. Evan turned. What? Listen. We stood still. At first, there was nothing. Then, gradually, a sound emerged. Whispering. Not voices, not quite, but something close. A soft, overlapping susurration that seemed to come from the trees themselves. From the leaves, the bark, the very fibers of the forest. I couldn't make out words. But I could feel meaning. A sense of insistence. Of repetition. Of something being counted. Evan shook his head, as if trying to clear it. We're getting turned around. We need to go back, I said. To the tree. I hesitated. Every instinct told me no. But the forest ahead felt wrong. Too dense. Too aligned. The path behind us, the one we thought we'd taken, felt like the only fixed point left. Yeah, I said finally. Back to the tree. Finding it again should have been difficult. It wasn't. The red tape stood out immediately, a bright slash of color in the dim green. But it wasn't where we'd left it. The branch it had been tied to was higher now, far above our reach, at least 10 feet off the ground. How did? Evan started. The tape fluttered slightly, though there was no wind. And beneath it, the tree we had cut. It was standing, whole, unbroken. I felt my stomach drop. That's not possible, Evan said. The trunk was intact, its bark unbroken, no sign of the cut we'd made. But at its base, lying on the forest floor, was the section we had removed. The cross-section faced upward. Waiting. We approached slowly. The rings were still there. But they had changed. The pattern remained, but the numbers had advanced. 4, 2, 2, 3. Tomorrow's date. We just cut this, I said, my voice thin. It can't. Evan stepped closer, his breathing shallow. It's updating. The word hung in the air, wrong and heavy. Updating. As if the tree were not recording time, but anticipating it. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. The creaking of the forest deepened, branches shifting overhead, trunks bending slightly toward us. I realized, with a cold clarity, that the trees were not just observing. They were orienting, aligning themselves around us, or around the tree. Don't touch it, I said as Evan reached out again. He froze. Then, slowly, he lowered his hand. The ground beneath us shifted. Not violently, but enough to unbalance us. The roots pressed upward, forming ridges that forced our feet into specific placements. 4 steps forward, 2 to the left, 2 back, 2 to the right. We stumbled, trying to resist, but the terrain guided us, nudging us into position. A shape, a pattern, the same pattern as the rings. We're part of it, Evan whispered. The realization hit like a physical blow. We weren't just observing the pattern. We were inside it. The tree, no, the forest, was arranging us. Counting us. Marking us. The whispering resolved slightly, just enough to suggest structure. Not language, but sequence. A cadence. 4, 2, 2, 2. Repeated over and over, rising and falling like breath. The air grew colder. Our breath fogged in front of us. And then, from the intact tree, something moved. The bark split, not like a wound, but like an opening. A vertical seam, peeling back to reveal the pale wood beneath. And within it, rings. Not in cross-section, but in layers, stacked inward like a tunnel. Each layer marked, not with numbers, but with shapes that our minds insisted on interpreting as numbers. Dates. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Extending inward beyond what the tree's size should allow. Each one precise. Each one distinct. And at the very center. A space. Empty. Waiting. Evan took a step forward. No, I said, grabbing his arm. But the ground shifted again, guiding him, placing his feet in that same sequence. 4, 2, 2, 2. He moved despite himself, his body following the contours of the forest. I can't stop, he said, panic breaking through his voice. I pulled harder, but my own footing slipped, the roots rising to separate us. He reached the opening. The whispering crescendoed. The forest leaned in, and the empty space at the center of the rings. It changed. Lines formed. Not carved, not grown, but appearing. 4, 2, 2, 2. The date. Tomorrow. But beneath it, something else began to take shape. Another set of numbers. Incomplete. Unfinished. Evan's foot crossed the threshold. The moment he touched the inner wood, the numbers completed. I don't know how I knew, but I did. It wasn't tomorrow's date anymore. It was his. A date. A specific one. And as it formed, Evan froze. Completely still. The forest fell silent. Even the whispering stopped. For a single, suspended moment, everything held. Then Evan exhaled. A long, slow breath. And stepped forward into the tree. He didn't disappear. Not exactly. He aligned. His body flattened, impossibly, becoming part of the layered rings. His outline stretched, warped, then settled into the pattern, indistinguishable from the wood except for a faint, darker trace. A new ring. A new mark. A new date. I screamed. The sound was swallowed instantly. The forest did not echo. It absorbed. I stumbled backward, tripping over the raised roots, scrambling to my feet. The opening in the tree sealed itself, the bark knitting back together seamlessly. The cross-section on the ground shifted again. The rings, rearranged. 4, 2, 2, 3. Tomorrow's date. And beneath it, another incomplete sequence. Waiting. The whispering returned, softer now. Expectant. I ran. I didn't follow the path. I didn't try to orient myself. I just moved, crashing through undergrowth, ignoring the pattern beneath my feet, forcing my body into irregular, chaotic motion. The forest resisted. Branches snagged at my clothes, roots rose to trip me, the ground sloped unnaturally to redirect me. But I kept going. Eventually, the density lessened. The light brightened slightly. The air warmed. The forest released me. I didn't stop until I reached the edge, where the trees thinned and the world felt normal. Or close enough. I didn't go back. I told people Evan got lost. That we were separated. That I searched, but couldn't find him. Search teams went in. They found nothing. No tree with strange rings. No red tape. No sign of Evan. The forest, it seemed, had rearranged itself again. Time passed. Days blurred into weeks. I tried to forget. Tried to convince myself it had been something else, some shared hallucination, some stress-induced break. But then, this morning, I found a piece of wood on my doorstep. A clean-cut cross-section. Small enough to hold in my hands. The rings were clear. Unmistakable. 4, 2, 2, 2. Today's date. My date. And beneath it, another set of numbers. Already forming. Already deciding. Tomorrow. Something kept whistling a tune we hadn't heard since childhood. At first, it was faint enough to ignore. A thin thread of sound drifting through the trees, barely louder than the wind slipping between branches. It came and went in fragments, 2 notes, then silence, then 3 more, trailing off as if whoever made it had forgotten the rest. We didn't stop walking. You hear that? I asked anyway, more out of reflex than concern. Jonah glanced over his shoulder, squinting as if sound could be seen if he tried hard enough. Wind, he said. But it wasn't wind. The rhythm was wrong. Too deliberate. Too measured. Wind didn't pause mid-phrase and then resume from the same note. The trees thinned briefly as the path dipped, and the light shifted, dull gray filtering through a ceiling of branches that felt too low, too close. The air was damp, carrying the smell of wet bark and old leaves breaking down into something sour. The whistling came again, clearer this time, 4 notes, rising. A pause. Then a falling pair that lingered longer than they should have, bending slightly at the end. Jonah stopped. His expression changed. Not alarm, not yet, but recognition pulling tight across his face. No, he said quietly. What? He shook his head, more to himself than to me. It's nothing. But he didn't move. The sound threaded through the trees again, drifting from somewhere ahead. The same sequence. Identical. Not a variation, not an improvisation. It repeated exactly, like a recording played on an unseen loop. I felt something stir at the edge of memory. Not a full recollection, just a pressure behind the eyes, like a word on the verge of being remembered. Where do I know that from? I murmured. Jonah didn't answer. He started walking again, faster this time, boots crunching over brittle twigs and damp soil. I followed, though something in me wanted to turn back, not out of fear yet, but unease, a sense that we were walking towards something that had already noticed us. The forest closed in. Not physically, not in a way you could measure, but the space between the trees seemed to compress. The trunks leaned inward at subtle angles, their bark dark and slick, ridged like old scars. The canopy above thickened, muting the light until it felt like late evening, though we'd only been hiking a few hours. The whistling continued. Always ahead. Always just out of reach. Do you remember it? I asked after a while. Jonah's shoulders tightened. Don't, he said. Jonah. I said don't. His voice snapped sharper than I'd ever heard it. The sound seemed to sink into the trees, absorbed rather than echoed. We walked in silence after that. But silence didn't mean quiet. The forest had its own noise, a low, continuous presence made up of countless small sounds, leaves shifting, branches creaking, something moving just out of sight. Underneath it all, the faint whistle threaded in and out, guiding us without ever revealing its source. It changed subtly as we went. Not the notes themselves, they remained exact, but the distance shifted. Sometimes it sounded close enough to be just beyond the next cluster of trees. Other times it drifted far off, barely audible. But it never disappeared completely. It wanted us to hear it. That realization settled slowly, like cold seeping into bone. This isn't right, I said eventually. Jonah didn't respond. Jonah. He stopped. Turned. There was something wrong with his expression. Not fear, not exactly, but something hollowed out behind the eyes, as if he were listening to something I couldn't hear. It's the skipping song, he said. The words hit with a dull, delayed force. What? The one from school, he went on, voice distant. From the playground. When we were kids. I stared at him. A flicker of memory surfaced. Sunlight. Concrete. The rhythm of feet slapping pavement in a circle. A chant. A tune. 4 notes up. Pause. 2 down. It clicked into place so suddenly it made my head ache. We used to. I started. Yeah, Jonah said. We used to sing it. Not whistle it. Sing it. The difference mattered, though I couldn't yet explain why. I haven't thought about that in years, I said. Me neither. The whistling came again, closer now. Clear. Perfect. But wrong. Because it wasn't just the tune. There was something beneath it. A second layer of sound, almost too quiet to detect. A breath, maybe. Or something like one. Jonah turned toward it. Without a word, he stepped off the path. Hey, I said. Where are you going? He didn't answer. The ground beyond the path was softer, uneven. Roots twisted up through the soil, forming ridges that forced our steps into awkward angles. The air grew colder as we moved deeper, the dampness clinging to our skin. The trees changed, too. Their bark grew smoother, paler, as if something had worn away the outer layers. The trunks were closer together here, packed tightly, their branches interlocking overhead to form a near-solid ceiling. The light dimmed further. The whistling stopped. We froze. For a moment, there was nothing. No wind, no insects, no distant movement, just a heavy, pressing silence that felt deliberate. Then, a child's voice. Soft, singing. The same tune. My stomach dropped. Do you hear that? I whispered. Jonah nodded slowly. The voice came from deeper within the trees, its pitch uneven, wavering slightly as if the singer were struggling to remember the exact melody. It wasn't quite right. The notes were correct, but the timing was off. Pauses stretched too long, or not long enough. The rhythm faltered, corrected itself, faltered again. Like something learning. Hello, Jonah called. The singing stopped immediately. Silence crashed back in, heavier than before. We waited. Nothing. Then, from behind us, the whistling resumed. We turned sharply. The path we'd left was gone. Not hidden. Gone. Where there had been a narrow clearing between trees, there was now only more forest, dense and uniform, as if the path had never existed. Okay, I said, my voice tightening. Okay, that's. Jonah raised a hand. Listen. The whistling circled us now. Not moving, exactly, but repositioning, appearing at different points around us without any sense of transition. Front, left, behind, right. Each time, the same sequence. Perfect, unchanged. And under it, faint but growing. Voices. Plural. Humming. Trying to match the tune. The air temperature dropped sharply. I could see my breath now, pale clouds dissipating too slowly. We need to get out of here, I said. Jonah didn't respond. He was staring at one of the trees. I followed his gaze. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just a pale trunk, smooth and slightly reflective in the dim light. Then the surface shifted. Not physically, perceptually. The grain of the wood aligned into shapes. Lines. Curves. Familiar. A child's drawing. Crude figures holding hands in a circle. And beneath them, scratched into the bark in uneven, shallow grooves. Marks. Short lines and longer ones, arranged in a sequence. 4. Pause. 2. 2. The tune. Carved into the tree. I used to draw that, Jonah said quietly. The way he said it made something inside me tighten. What do you mean? In class, he said. On my desk. On paper. Everywhere. That circle. That song. The humming grew louder. More voices joining, overlapping in a dissonant chorus. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. More carvings. On every trunk within sight. Different drawings. Different hands. Some crude, some more detailed. All children's marks. All variations of the same scene. Circles. Figures. And always the same pattern. Beneath them, the tune, translated into scratches. This isn't just yours, I said. Jonah shook his head. No, he whispered. It's everyone's. The realization settled in, cold and heavy. The song wasn't just ours. It was a childhood thing. A shared fragment, passed between kids, altered slightly from place to place but fundamentally the same. Something learned early. Something forgotten. Something the forest remembered. The singing returned. Closer. Directly ahead. A figure stood between the trees. Small. Still. I felt my breath catch. It looked like a child, but not fully solid. Its outline wavered, as if it were made of smoke or shadow pressed into a vaguely human shape. Its head tilted slightly, and then it whistled. Perfectly. The exact tune. Clear and sharp. Jonah took a step forward. No, I said, grabbing his arm. The figure shifted. More shapes emerged from the trees behind it. Dozens. All small. All indistinct. All watching. The temperature dropped further, biting now, seeping through layers of clothing. The ground beneath us softened, sinking slightly with each step. The humming became singing again. The same tune, over and over. But now, the voices were wrong. Too many. Too layered. Each slightly out of sync with the others, creating a warped, echoing distortion that made the melody feel stretched and broken. They're trying to remember it, I said. Or teach it, Jonah replied. The lead figure raised its head. Its mouth opened, wider than it should have. The next note came out wrong. Not just off key, off in a deeper sense, like the sound itself didn't belong to a human throat. The others followed, repeating, correcting, failing, trying again. The forest leaned in, branches creaked, bending toward the clearing. The trunks shifted imperceptibly closer, tightening the space around us. The carvings on the bark seemed deeper now, more defined, as if freshly etched. Jonah pulled free of my grip. They want it right, he said. What? The tune. They want it right. He stepped forward. Jonah, stop. He didn't. The figures parted slightly, creating a narrow opening. An invitation. Or a path. I can show them, he said. The words came out calm. Certain. Like he had already decided. Jonah. He began to whistle. The tune. Perfect. Clear. Exactly as it had been on that playground, years ago. The effect was immediate. The singing stopped. The humming ceased. Every figure froze. The forest stilled. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Jonah finished the sequence. Silence. Then, the lead figure stepped forward. It raised one arm, thin and indistinct, and reached toward him. For a moment, I thought it would touch him. Instead, it passed through him. And as it did, Jonah's body jerked. His whistle cut off abruptly. His posture changed, subtly, but unmistakably. His shoulders slumped slightly, his head tilting at the same angle as the figures. The figure moved behind him. Or into him. I couldn't tell. Jonah stood there, unmoving. Jonah, I said. He didn't respond. Then he whistled again. The tune. Perfect. But it wasn't him. The sound was identical, but it lacked something, an inflection, a human irregularity. It was too precise. The other figures began to hum. Matching him. Aligning. The distortion lessened. The melody stabilized. The forest exhaled. A slow, creaking release. The branches eased back. The temperature rose slightly. Relief, false, fleeting, brushed against me. They got it, I whispered. Jonah turned. His eyes found mine. Something was wrong. Not empty. Not possessed in the way stories describe. But layered. As if something else were looking through him, using him as a reference point. They remember now, he said. His voice carried two tones at once, his own, and something softer beneath it, echoing the same words a fraction of a second later. The figures behind him began to fade. One by one, dissolving into the trees. The carvings on the bark smoothed over, the grooves filling in as if time were reversing. The forest returned to its earlier state. Dense. Silent. Watching. Jonah stepped back toward me. You okay? I asked. He nodded. But he didn't look okay. He looked aligned. Like something had been adjusted. Let's go, I said. This time, when we turned, the path was there. Clear. Obvious. We didn't question it. We walked. The forest no longer resisted. The ground was even, the air steady. The oppressive presence receded, though it never fully disappeared. We didn't speak. Not until the light began to change, growing dimmer in a natural way now, the approach of evening rather than something imposed. Then, faintly, from somewhere behind us, the whistling returned. We stopped. It was different. Not the same tune. Not exactly. It started the same, 4 notes rising. But the ending shifted. The final 2 notes bent, stretching into something unfamiliar. Something new. Jonah's head tilted slightly, listening. That's not right, I said. He didn't answer. The whistling came again, closer. And beneath it, a second line. A harmony. Unsteady. Learning. Jonah's lips parted. No, I said quickly. Don't. But he wasn't looking at me. He was looking back into the trees. They changed it, he said softly. The realization hit like a cold wave. They didn't just remember, I said. They adapted, he finished. The whistling continued. The new version, refined with each repetition. Jonah inhaled, and began to whistle along. Not the old tune. The new one. Perfectly. I stepped back. Jonah, stop. He didn't. The forest around us shifted, subtly, but unmistakably. The path behind us narrowed. The trees leaned, listening, learning. The harmony strengthened. And for a brief, terrifying moment, I understood. The song wasn't something the forest had found. It was something it was building. Using us. Using memory. Using sound. To create something new. Jonah finished the sequence. Silence followed. Then, from deep within the trees. A response. Not one voice. Not many. Something else. A single, vast whistle. Too large to belong to any human throat. It echoed the new tune perfectly. Jonah smiled. And I realized, with a hollow certainty, that he wasn't remembering anymore. He was teaching. The forest leaned closer. And this time, when the whistling began again, it didn't come from behind us. It came from everywhere, including, faintly, from somewhere inside my own chest.